Hi, my name's Andy Kessler, and I'm here with Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and welcome to the Deep Astrology podcast. I just wanted to say a couple of things here. My intention that got me motivated to do this and series of discussions with Christopher was really because uh, so many of my friends are just wonderful, intelligent people. A lot of people who've known me from other chapters of my life, people involved in, especially in different music worlds, whether that's hardcore or punk or underground music or to experimental music, all kinds of other stuff. And just the fact that so many people I know and care about are having a really, really bad time. And I know that as it happens, a lot of these people and people I know are really, I think, have sort of sometimes, some of them at least, have wondered about my own practices and my own kind of spiritual life, soul centered practices, whatever we would call it, my practice of astrology and stuff. And really, I suppose if I was pretentious enough to have a message to those folks, it really would is that since we're in a time of kind of collective fragmentation, and it's just to put it euphemistically, such a challenging time. um, it's really a good time to look within, look to spiritual life, look to esoteric traditions, and get into this stuff, and because I think it could help you. And that was really my motivation, not to be a podcast guy or a fucking YouTube this or that or whatever the fuck about the astrological world or anything, or the occult scene or anything like that. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump right in and we'll see what ends up happening today.
You know what I would say as a response to that is that I think that it's really important to be uh, as open-minded as possible about stuff. And open-mindedness and tolerance, it's great as far as tolerating stuff you like, right? But the hardest thing is really tolerance is putting up with stuff you don't like. And it's funny, I was reading the New York Times today and they went on this rant about white Christians, and they start talking about the Ku Klux Klan and white Christian this and white Christian that. And I'm just like, wait a second. There's definitely a strong right wing and extreme right wing, in the United States. There's no question about it. It permeates it. It always has. But you don't want to throw all Christians, into that category. And there's this idea, and it comes from atheistic materialism, this sort of aggressive atheistic materialism, is that religion is evil and inherently evil, and that anything to do with religion is, or spirituality or whatever is suspect, and it's questionable. And it's like, that's one of those attitudes that if you're going to go anywhere, you want to drop that. I mean, you don't want to automatically assume it's good or automatically assume it's bad. You say, okay, let me just look at some stuff that I maybe haven't looked at before, and question some stuff about my basic preconceptions and see what you can do with it. But it's like, frankly, I'm not wild about a lot of Christian stuff, the way it's currently presented. And I think they've gone off track, but I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater with that. I do, like, for example, I do a series of Hail Marys every day, right? That I really do connect with that. So, that's something where I think there's a true spiritual path within Christianity, as corrupted as parts of it may be. Um, so I think that that's important to do, is to say, okay, what's the stuff? Let's look at things. And I'm not going to want to be a fundamentalist, right? But nevertheless, maybe there's some things I can look at that have some, because what I'm doing right now isn't working. Like I said, if you're perfectly happy right now, then you don't need to change, right? That's what that pain is, that suffering is it's a warning signal, right? It's a warning signal that something's off, and that's not to say I could go the other extreme. I think the modern American thing is I should never be in pain ever, that I should be happy all the time. I should never have any suffering. And if I do, then something needs to be changed. I need a pill. I need something. I need to change something. It's like, no, pain is a normal part of life. It's a warning. You stub your toe, you're like, okay, there's pain there, so take care of it. And I mean, with leprosy, what happens is that they don't have any pain signals and they end up really damaging themselves. So
Right.
they, by having no pain, they're actually what far worse off. But really what it is a wake-up call. And so if what you're doing right now is making you really happy and it's full of meaning and everything, then you don't have to worry about it. But like you said, many people are in the sense of like of pain and suffering and meaninglessness, which I think actually is the normal end result of nihilism. And
Sure. Yeah.
that's why it's but I'm saying just open. You don't have to accept anything, but don't automatically reject it. I mean, that's sort of what I say is, just suspend disbelief, look at stuff, and then you'll be able to decide for yourself, whether you think you want to do any of this stuff or not.
Right. Well, a lot of wisdom in what you said, and sort of to begin to formulate a response. I mean, the vilification of things, things we don't like, whether or certain entities don't like, Christians, this, that, whatever, and just kind of this unthinking rancor and just arrogant kind of just nastiness. I mean, this really we're seeing. This is really just, I think, a feature that's been a phenomenon that's just been intensifying over the last couple of years for sure, or some would say last a bunch of years. Anyways, but yeah, but I mean, this is it's unfortunately part of the human condition. But exactly, I mean, regarded with respect to Christianity itself, I wouldn't even know where to begin, but I mean, all the mainstream religions, however one might feel about them from the perspective of a practitioner, or whatever, they're all fascinating. I mean, the history of religions is totally amazing. I mean, I almost kind of went into it as to become kind of an academician or whatever, but I mean, especially the early church and the formative influences on the church. And, if people, that's the thing, not everyone's a reader, I mean, and some of the most intelligent people that I've ever known, of course, are people who, dropped out of school in sixth grade or whatever. But, one of the cool things about learning is it can really just open up things you didn't know existed, and maybe even help you not be controlled by certain things, certain patterns or whatever, certain beliefs, etc. I mean, actually, last time when we spoke, I mentioned that probably C.G. Jung was really one of the first like heavy real thinkers or whatever that I started reading. And one of the cool things I got out of Jung, um, well, one of the things I did was, when he would make these references that, I totally didn't understand and had absolutely no familiarity with, which was almost like every paragraph. Quite often I would look them up, I would take the time eventually to go figure out what he was talking about. So, when he was talking about Gnostic sects and, St. Augustine and, Manichaeism and all this stuff, I'd be like, what the fuck is this? And I actually want to go find out about it. So, I mean, learning about just, it's funny because one thing, so many people who today don't know the history of their own religions, even fairly religious people, I mean, I don't know. Anyways, but
I was going to say two things about it. First of all, it's funny because like I used to, when I'd read, if I didn't know a word, I'd look it up, right? So
right.
now I do that with internet. It's crazy. You can just instantly do that. And in fact, it's funny now when I get an order, I always look up the place. Like this is the city so and so. Like for example, I had one from Hong Kong and they had some look part of Hong Kong. I'm like, all right, I'll look it up. So I but that's partly because I'm a rising. I have an air sign rising. And that Zoller said to me once, he said, if you have air sign rising, then one of your drives is toward knowledge, you know? And so that's just one of those things, is that I just happen to be a sponge for knowledge. And, that's my thing. But what I want to say too about that is a little bit of a trap, because if you just keep focusing on learning pieces of information, it's like, then you want to do something with it. It's funny because last night I was doing this search on Amazon and I put quote practical, which was kind of funny. So all I got was book titles that had the word practical in the title. So that was kind of fun. There was a lot of magic. There was a lot of people doing like stuff with, being a minister or whatever, Bible stuff. But there's a lot of other interesting things. And that's really what I'm into. I'm into doing stuff. And, to me, the information is useful insofar as, it can give you an experience. You can enjoy it for itself. But but a lot of it is, okay, what can what can be done with it? And and then that's what's nice about the astrology and magic, is these are ways that you can have a practical application of these spiritual principles or philosophy. You can actually do a hands-on thing with it, and the academic thing is a little bit of a trap. That's what people have. You can either be sort of a credulous new age, believe in everything, or you can be academic and you study about it and you don't believe in any of it. And those are kind of your binary choice there. And so one of the things I've tried to do is just say, okay, I want to be a scholarly practitioner, right? But not really a scholar. I want to understand the historical background. I want to have it do the sources, but ultimately what reason I'm doing this is to do it.
Exactly.
And I'm not studying about it. I'm not writing a thesis. I'm not, publish or perish kind of paradigm or whatever, and I'm not like a bug on a pin. It's not like this is some dead weird shit that I'm just going to study about because of the weirdness of people believing in it. I mean, that for a long time, that's the way any book about astrology and magic, academics would always start saying, how could these otherwise rational people be so foolish as to believe in something that's so blatantly ridiculous, without recognizing that that's blatantly ridiculous from an atheistic materialistic standpoint where everything's random? I mean, obviously astrology can't work because everything's random, right? Well, then the story, here we go. But you're not going beneath that. And that's what we're talking about, the whole worldview thing.
Right, right.
So
Well, just to clarify for a second, Christopher mentioned Zoller, and for people who don't know, because I'd like to, in these podcasts, try to give credit where credit's due when possible and stuff. So that he's referring to Robert Zoller, who was a renowned practitioner and scholar of medieval astrology, and he was a teacher of yours, right? And
yeah, I
of
mean,
magic more than astrology, correct?
I mean, he really, and he didn't teach me practical magic, but he
Mhm.
kind of got me oriented in terms of worldview and philosophy to
Right.
be able to kind of deal with it. And he was really best known for medieval natal astrology. He was doing
Mhm.
a ton of stuff with Guido Bonatti's Liber Astronomia, and he was an excellent teacher and a great astrologer. Had a really messed up personal life, but that was not to be. He had an interesting chart. Is like Sun in Aquarius opposed to Saturn in Leo,
Mhm.
which both of those are afflicted and are opposing each other. I mean, he had just had a lot of difficult stuff in his chart. And it was interesting because he had a difficult life too. He had Parkinson's disease. He had a lot of blow ups with people. So it's just interesting. Nevertheless, was one of the most important contemporary traditional astrologers. He started a lineage,
Right.
the natal stuff.
Right.
So
But to go back to a lot of what you were saying, I mean, for sure, this might be a really good subject too. We could really get into, this, I don't know, this polarity or this distinction between analytical knowledge, or what people like to call, discursive reason and such like that, as opposed to the deeper, for lack of a better word, gnosis or realization that comes from experience, and again, I'm not a Jungian, but there's a famous clip of C.G. Jung. You probably find it all over YouTube. He was interviewed by, I don't remember the fellow's name, a British guy. And when he asked him about God, and Jung was quite old in this interview clip. I'm sure you know it, right? This guy, I think he may have been a BBC person. Anyway, and he asked Jung, Jung's probably in his 80s at this point in time. He said, "Do you believe in God?" And, the famous quote, Jung looks at him and goes, "I don't believe, I know."
yeah, that's my
Right.
response
So,
too. I mean,
I,
that's because that's the classic thing, is like, you believe in Santa Claus, right?
right.
I mean, that's the classic formulation of that, because it's ridiculous. Everybody knows it's not true, yet I believe in it anyway because I'm foolish enough to be, follow authority or do whatever. So that's that classic formulation. And believing in stuff, you believe in something that you have no evidence for. You believe in something that's ridiculous, even though you know you shouldn't believe in it. And so that's not. But like I said, if I said my response to that, I say, do you believe in atoms? And people are like, what do you mean? I mean, atoms exist. So you've never seen one, right? And I was like,
Right.
no. I mean, you have to basically take it on trust. Well, it's like Hawaii. I've never been to Hawaii,
Me
right?
neither.
I've never seen it, but it doesn't, I trust that it's there because it makes sense that, the world's round and there's islands, right? And there's a
Right.
lot of evidence for it. I mean, I've met people that have been there,
I picked up
right?
people
And I've
at the
seen pictures
airport
of it.
coming back.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there could be some vast conspiracy that there's no Hawaii. I mean, I haven't experienced it, but my basic thing is that given my worldview and given the information I received, it's not illogical within the context of that worldview.
Right. To equivocate a bit, though, in a way, though, I mean, thankfully, we're fortunate to have really great researchers of whatever variety, whether they're professional academicians or not. And some of the greatest ones are not, to my knowledge, professionally trained researchers and such, with advanced degrees and everything. But I mean, because we need people to uncover things and trace a trajectory, and it can be helpful because if we didn't have these people, I mean, then any asshole can just say anything and claim anything, so it's like we have to balance it. And
Well, that's what I'm saying about balancing is important.
exactly balancing. And again, I mean, maybe this would be a good time too, because I kind of want to, in a way, refer to certain things we touched upon last time when we spoke, which I think I can speak for the both of us when I could say, like, neither you or I hate science. We're not Luddites.
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, okay. Well, we may hate certain developments, right? Which
I would actually go further than that and say that science, insofar as science insists that, first of all, science is atheistic materialist. I don't think you can do science but buying into an atheistic materialistic viewpoint. I mean, it's so embedded in it. If you were going to do, empirical inquiry that had a spiritual basis, it really wouldn't be science. So atheistic materialism is
not a modern science.
But it wouldn't, but you know what I mean? You have to do such damage to it. It's no longer really science anymore. And so then the other concept is the objectivity, is that I'm here and there's stuff out there that I have no relation to. So that's how you end up with we're up in the helicopter and we're shooting the polar bears because we got to shoot them to save the rest of them, or like I saw this thing about language, and they raise kittens in the dark.
Yeah.
Right. So they could test language. I'm like, you're the most evil motherfuckers to do that. You know what I mean? That's just some evil shit. And I'm like, oh, we need the knowledge. It's like, what's the difference? And then you get Mengele at the concentration camp and the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. I mean, that's like, those aren't really aberrations so much as they're pushing that objectivity, right, and separation to the nth degree. So it's like, insofar as you, on the other hand, yeah, you can't have the technology without that. But it's like that technology is like, I don't know. I mean, I think we may have made a mistake with agriculture. That might have been a big mistake to even to start doing that.
Man, everything you're saying, this is all so loaded. I mean, we could talk for fucking weeks about some of these things, but
that's what I'm saying about, because when you talk about this, you have to go, oh, science, we love science. We pray to the God of science. We give obedience to science. I'm not insulting science because science is reality. Oh, please, oh, great one, do not smite me. Because you have to do that. Because if you come back science, unscientific means insane. Right? I mean, and non-atheistic materialistic is irrational. So you're insane.
Right. Well, you could have so much, who would say, well, no, in its pure form, science is a method.
Pure bullshit, like
methodology.
There's principles. No pure anything, though. That's like pure communism. Pure communism is what? Pure capitalism. Blah, blah, blah. Show that to me. I've never seen it in the wild, right?
Right.
Give me an example of pure, because it isn't. Every time you get it, it's always polluted, corrupted, or whatever. But no, that's not polluted or corrupted. That's the essence of it, is that, like I said, scientific method, right, is the idea that you can take and you have a hypothesis, and then you have an experiment and you isolate everything and you do just this one thing, and that proves that. Right.
But so the question arises, why did such a thing arise and become so dominant, or beyond dominant?
Well, first of all, because of here's the thing about it, is that really it's technology.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that people are so enthralled by science is because you got plasma screen TVs, you got SUVs, you got jets, and computers and all that sort of stuff. I mean, if that stuff falls apart, if industrial civilization falls, then the hold of science over people's mind will break as well.
Right.
Because it's equated. I mean, basically, look how powerful we are. Look at all the stuff we can do. Anybody who can do this stuff really must know they really have their shit together. They really must know what they're doing. And it's like, and yeah, I mean, we're talking on Zoom, and exactly. I've got computer stuff and everything. So I like having air conditioning. I mean,
that's kind of my point. Why I brought it up.
I'm not really trying to. At the same time, here's the thing.
Things have their place.
Well, not even that. it's extremely easy to do a critique of things, right? It
Sure.
really is. I mean, I was
Always.
just reading this thing about Amazon, and this
Hmm.
person was going on and on about, I mean, and Amazon is really messed up in terms of like exploitation and all this sort of stuff. But that person was ordering stuff from Amazon. And so I'm like, so that's what I would
Yeah.
say is like, you know, you Marx, for example, wonderful criticism of capitalism. He was spot on, but the solution was a disaster,
Sure.
you know? And this is the thing is like, when you come to the point of actually solving these problems, it's much more difficult. And maybe it's
Always.
insolvable. Maybe
That's
there's this
right.
part of the human, but what I would say about science is that we, the science has the greatest prestige, right? And therefore anything that offends science, you know, is problematic. And it's very much tied up with the science, the atheistic materialism. And it really
Without a
is. It's like
doubt.
that's the assumption is that, like for example, one of the examples I use is Albertus Magnus. He was a 13th century Dominican monk. He's known as a great, he's a saint. He's
Right.
also a natural philosopher. And so he wrote a book called De Mineralibus, which is on stones. And so part of that, he had a whole section on making talismans.
Hmm.
And so for him, it's like his main focus in that book was on minerals. But obviously the spiritual came into it. And it's a bit like if you talk to a biologist and you said, look, does chemistry have anything to do with what you're doing? He's like, well, not, you know, not directly. We don't study that, but obviously chemical processes are important in any biological system, right? I mean, it's
Certainly.
part of it. It's just not our focus. But if you ask
Right.
about spirituality, they'll be like, well, that's something we don't deal with. It's in another
Exactly.
category. It's nothing to do with us. It's somewhere else. If they're polite, if they're not polite, they're like, get the fuck out of here. That's all bullshit. And so
Totally.
this is the difference is that, you know, in order, you can have empirical inquiry, right? But if your worldview, right, is atheistic materialistic, then you're only going to keep replicating atheistic materialism.
Right. And on
And no
that
matter
note,
what you do
yeah,
with
yeah,
it,
yeah.
that's all
Right.
you're going to get.
Sure. And
You
that's the
know, the
thing.
worldview
Mhm.
determines the results.
Right. So here, check this out. So I think I told you this, but so long ago, I was actually admitted to a graduate program at a big university, and it was in comparative religion, right? And early on, the head of the department kind of found out that I wanted to study, you know, mysticism, so-called mystical aspects of religion, and he basically said to me, he kind of came on with this attitude like, no, dear boy, you know, because you know in the humanities they've of course long ago had tried to adopt the methods of the so-called hard science, right? But and a lot of this maybe goes back to, well, anyways, but his attitude towards me was basically, oh no, dear boy, you cannot possibly study mysticism here. We can only focus on socio-linguistic aspects of religion. These are the only things that can be studied and that appear to us, dear fellow. Don't you understand this by now? Yes, yes, yes. If you insist upon trying to study so-called mysticism, you can't do it here. No, no, you know, and that was the attitude, right? In fact, we could actually deconstruct the idea of religion itself, because perhaps it really is not even anything. And it's like, well, you're the head of this department, man. But anyway.
But this is the thing is that, you know, it's funny because my wife is taking a class right now that she enjoys, but one of the questions that they had a little quiz was like, um, should there be should medicine have a philosophy, or should we bother with that? It's like,
Mhm.
and like you have one, or you always have one. You
Right.
always have a worldview. And to say, but see that this is just the truth. This is reality. You people might have a philosophy because you're confused, but we have the truth. And I mean that's the real, and
Exactly.
that's the thing about it is it's a fundamentalist view, you
Exactly.
know. And
Exactly.
so that's what I would say about it is, I mean, I think that it's hard for people to get into the really woo-woo aspects of what we do. I mean, when we're talking about spells and summoning angels, and you know, I've got to look at my outfit. I've got my whole Zen, you know, not a
Totally.
dress uniform on. It's sort of like a little more informal thing, and Buddhas and everything, and lighting candles and praying. I was reading this really book about doing the rosary, you know, and I'm like, oh yeah, maybe I'll do some more of that sort of stuff. And I think that's a little hard for people. It's sort of like that's getting a little out there. So they maybe want to just dip your foot in the water a little bit with it to start. But you know, to me, it's like once my reality is one that's full of spirits, right? I'm like, well, why shouldn't I be like talking to them all the time? You know, why shouldn't I be like, you know, for example, we have this big rock in our yard, and we have a Shinto, what they do with any kind of sort of sacred thing. Now, obviously in Shinto, everything's alive, but for particular stuff like rocks and trees that are cool looking, they'll put what's called a shiminawa, which is like a rope around it. And it's sort of like it delineates it as a sacred space. So I've got this shiminawa on my rock, and I do a whole thing to it every day, because that's like the genius loci. I mean, that's the neighborhood spirit. You
Right.
know?
Did you
For real. I
mhm,
mean, not just not a
exactly.
joke. I mean, that's the thing. Because it's funny when my neighbors, I'll be like, yo, that's the genius loci. And they'll be like, and I'll be like, ha ha ha. And they can kind of like not think I'm insane. But for this group, for the podcast, they'll be like, no. I mean, it's like, I believe it. You know what I mean? It's like, that's, um, you know, it makes sense to me. Like I said, it makes sense to me that everything is alive.
Were you
And
exposed to Shinto practices from some of your students in Japan? Because I know you've been there a few times, a little bit.
I wouldn't say I was, I mean, here's the thing about Japanese people is that they're like sort of like, um, you know, and I like the way they approach things. They don't, they're not like a Buddhist, right? They just do stuff. I
Hmm.
mean, they'll just seamlessly kind of combine Shinto, Buddhist, whatever else they want to be doing at the same time. They like Western stuff. It's very exotic. So they love that tarot. They'll do all this sorts of stuff.
Hmm.
But I mean, you can see behind me right there, this is just up there. This is called the Kamidana, which is Kamidana literally means like God box. And it's a little shrine.
Portable shrine.
Yeah, and it's sitting up. You're supposed to have it up, and you can see in front of it there's a shide, that white paper thing. That's Shinto, and it's got what are called ofuda, which are like from these shrines in it. So I've got 3 different spirits that live there, and I
Nice.
mean, do I do a thing for it every day is one of my spiritual rounds. But I like that approach. I mean, the Shinto is like I said, everything is alive, everything has a spirit, right? And you react to it. I mean, one of the cool things, like for example, this Japanese exterminator company, right? Every year they go to a Shinto shrine and they do a ceremony for the bugs to apologize for the bugs.
Mhm.
They're like, "We're sorry we killed you," and then they had done it with robots. So people, when the robot, like they, you know, those Sony robots, you ever seen those before, the dance? When they run out, they take them to the Shinto shrine and like, you know, like they're dead. You know what I mean? They do a little
Mhm.
ceremony for them, you know? So this, because it's alive, you know? And the thing is, you know, people say like with a robot, you respond to it as if it's a living being, right?
Right.
And then it is a living being. I mean, we are, that's another thing with us. It's like, you know, why are we, you know, that, you know, we're people, right? Well, you know, they talk about Mother Nature. I mean, that's like, that's treated as personification too. So it's like, if it acts like a person, you know, it's a person, you know? And
Exactly.
so, but you say, oh no, it's like with animals, like, well, no, they don't really have feelings. They're not really, I mean, my cat, we were joking the other day. He understands English, but he doesn't put on, he won't admit it. Like my wife was like, I forget what she said. She said something about, you know, we're going to do X, and he gets up and leaves and, you know, goes over to it, the door. You know, like, we're going to go out now. So he's like, hears that and goes over to the door. I mean, it's like, you know, don't tell me if you have a pet that that's not a conscious living being. I mean, get out of here.
Certainly.
Anybody who's ever had a dog or a cat and reacted with it. But the scientists will be like, well, I don't know. I don't know. It's true or not. I
Sure.
mean, you go back to the whole Victorian thing, like Victorian Englishmen. I'm like, well, I'm a being, but you know, women aren't really real, and certainly, you know, those peasant, you know, lower class people, and you know, and definitely like other races. Oh, well, they're not even close. So that's the whole. I get that too. Like even in Buddhism, they're like sentient beings. Everything's freaking sentient. The
Right.
mountain is. I mean, that's like the Zen stuff. The mountain is sentient. The snow is sentient. The river is sentient. You know, they're all aware. You
Right.
know.
Excellent. Right.
So there's
So
a good
again,
rant.
yeah, no, it was great. But again, so you know, I really like how you subtitled. I'm not clear if that was a subtitle, astrology and magic as a spiritual portal. If that was a subtitle for our first meeting or for the entire
I
series,
think
but
the
the
whole
whole
thing.
that's what
Yeah.
I think
Right.
too. Yeah, deep astrology, astrology and magic as a spiritual portal. Yeah, I think it's really great. And so, um, in a way,
You know what I was going to say about that is that
uh
there's a lot of you know, like they said, in my father's house, there's many rooms. You know, there's lots of doors. You know what I
exactly,
mean? This is just a door, and it's sort
a
of
door.
like if you like it, you can do it that way. You know, that's
It
not
is,
to say it's the only
yes,
door, the only way, or that it suits everybody. But it's like if
exactly.
it's trippy for you, then, go for it. And that's,
Exactly.
that's true of a lot of stuff though. It's like everybody's going to have, there's a hadith. A hadith is sort of
I understand.
a saying of Muhammad that's been attested, that has a line of lineage. Hadith that says there's many paths as are human souls.
Good. That's a
So
really good one.
and everybody's on the path,
Right.
whether they know it or not.
Right. And so astrology and magic, although, yeah, they're not for everyone. And in a way, I would just like to say that hopefully these discussions might serve as kind of invitations for people to explore or even to jump right in, because there are riches, there are depths here. And, and again, this is real. This stuff is
I was going to say, I think we could do a better job than a lot of people, because a lot of people, they're just like, oh, I'm in astrology. And it's like, how does it work? Well,
right. Synchronicity.
No,
Yeah.
don't worry about that shit. Just do it. It works. I did it the other day. It's great.
Right.
Or they're over like this. To bring up Zoller, he supposedly predicted 9/11. Okay.
Sure. I remember
that whole thing about it. I'm like, I don't think so. I mean, I'm a little more rigorous about it. I'm not saying it's not possible to predict astrologically, but it's like, to me, I mean, and I have an example on my website that's very interesting. I did it as my graduation for my horary course. Was this intern had disappeared in DC. We lived in DC at the time. She disappeared. So I did two charts I looked at, was like the time of her disappearance and the last time she was seen, right? And so based on those charts, I said, okay, and we had no idea what happened. I said, okay, she's dead, right? She's probably been murdered, right? Probably strangled. Her body is hidden. And I was able to even do a location. I said it's north of Rock Creek Park. It's in Rock Creek Park, and it's north of the zoo, south of the riding stables, looking at the stuff. And I all based that on the charts, and then on astrological, I was able to cite to this, the Christian astrology as to where I was based on. And lo and behold, a year later, her body is found. It's on a rocky wooded slope. It's disappeared, and the hyoid bone is crushed, which is classic of someone being strangled. So, I mean, it's possible to do that kind of prediction, but unless you have the chart and the written prediction in advance, and then you have the results, to me, that's the gold standard.
Certainly. Well, I remember the statement or the predictions that Robert Zoller had sent out. I used to have a copy of it, and he did mention Osama bin. He definitely said that there might be some very devastating terrorist attacks in the eastern seaboard of the United States around.
He's been saying, he said stuff for years beforehand.
And then he actually named Osama bin Laden and stuff, but he also made a lot of other statements that.
I mean, let me just talk about that, because we're talking about, okay, so what happened was, at that point, Zoller had gotten hooked up with these new library guys, which were these guys in England. And they had set up this deal where they were going to pay him, and he was going to create these lessons, and they were going to sell it for him, was the deal. And so as part of that, they were promoting him, and they sent out this thing, saying, after 9/11, they sent out this thing saying Robert Zoller predicted 9/11. And they said, because he was talking at some workshops, and he said, yes, there's going to be a terrorist attack on the East Coast, right? Okay, sometime in September. Okay, so all right. So I said, okay, because by that point, I remember 9/11, I was so sick of it. We were just like 9/11. I mean, it was, I don't know if you didn't live through that or weren't aware at that time, it was like 9/11, nothing but 9/11 for like a year, just like jammed out. So I was so sick of it. I said, could I see the chart? Right? Because if it's an astrological prediction, let's see the chart. And so when I said that, they freaked out on me, and they just freaked their shit on me. Like, and you're a heretic, you're evil, all this sort of stuff. I'm like, all I asked was to see the chart. And so I mentioned it to, because Robert Zoller, his wife at the time, or girlfriend or whatever, was in Vancouver. So they had invited me to come. He said, and you got to buy your own ticket, but we'll do this whole thing for you, and you can stay with us and all this sort of stuff. So I called up Rob. And I said, I'm a little bit concerned about this. I said, these guys, I don't know if they're looking out for your interest, because they said you predicted it, and I just asked to see the chart, and they started freaking out. And he was like, well, these people are they're supporting me, and you're with me or against me, blah, blah, blah. And then after that, his wife emails me and says, you can't stay with us. We canceled the workshop. Do you still want to come? I'm like, no. And I was like persona non grata with him ever after that. And so that was my experience with it. And the other thing that happened was, after that 9/11, he sent out this frantic email saying there was going to be another attack. And I said, well, where? What's going on? And no answer. And he'd been predicting death and devastation for years. And he said the Chinese were going to invade the United States. He had all this stuff. So it's like he was making he was freaked out about terrorism. He was making a lot of stuff. Who knows what the basis of it was. And he hit one of them. Right.
I understand.
But that's not astrological prediction because, like I said, you need a chart. Right. So we can all look at the chart. Here's the written prediction based on astrological principles beforehand, and then the results. And that, another one is Lily's prediction of the Fire of London. Oh, Lily predicted the Great Fire of London, blah, blah, blah. Okay. What that consists of is Lily was not only into astrology, but also into prophecies. Mm-hmm. And so he had a book of what he called hieroglyphics. And in these books were a bunch of pictures. And so one of the pictures was two twins upside down over a fire. Right now, two twins are Gemini, I guess, right? And Gemini is London. So that's like a fire in London. Okay. So that was the prediction. And in fact, he was asked after the Restoration, when Charles II came back in Parliament, because he was a parliamentarian, they were kind of worried about anyone supporting Parliament. If he had predicted, he said, well, I knew there was going to be a fire, but didn't know when.
I see.
So that's not an astrological prediction. Sure. Right? It's like, oh, Lily and that's one of those things. Oh, Lily predicted the Fire of London. Zola predicted this, and we believe in it. It's like, that's, this is the thing. And I'm like, this is where I'm like, we don't need to be totally skeptical, and we don't need to totally believe in it either. We want to look at the evidence dispassionately, but without necessarily assuming that it's impossible. I mean, that's a problem with the atheistic materialism, is like, it's obviously impossible. I saw someone saying, in order to prove the something like that, you have to have higher than normal proof. So it wouldn't be enough to have scientific proof. You'd have to have extra scientific proof because it's so ridiculous. I'm like, you just changing the rules, you know?
Well, I know that all of your students and followers and such very much appreciate your dedication to getting to the heart of things like this. But just to take things back a little bit. So for folks who may not know, we could probably just distinguish like a primary difference between what we could call ancient astrology and traditional astrology, from distinguishing it from modern forms of astrology would be prediction, meaning that traditionally astrology was primarily used to predict, and Christopher's really devoted his career to this, as you could see. I'm a bit torn because I mean, there's so much that I wanted to speak with you about, and I'm always wanting to stay more general and try to keep things open for people who may not have much of a background and may not really know what the fuck we're talking about if we get specific. But then, of course, I do want us to get specific and get really into astrological stuff and with techniques. So I don't know. Let's just go with whatever.
Do both.
Let's do whatever the fuck we want. And
so ask me the specific thing.
Well, oh boy, man, maybe it's a good time to sort of get to the question of, let me just ask you, so what do you love to do best in your astrological work?
What I love to do best?
Yeah.
Well, it's my job.
Right. So, but see, I love doing natal astrology.
Yeah, but I was just going to say, it's funny because like, I think about 99% of people are doing astrology for fun, right? And it's like, it's for fun, you just do whatever you want. And that's a lot of fun if it's your job, right? And I've been doing this for like 25 or 30 years now. It's like, some of it's a drag, because it's a job. Now, on the other hand, if I step back from that, say it's astrology job, I'm like, wait a second, what am I complaining about? That's an awesome way to make a living. So I just need to have some perspective. It's like a bit like where I'm like, if I'm not getting clients, I'm freaking out. And if I'm getting too many clients, I'm never happy. So that's part of my personality, is that like, I seem to look on the dark side of it. But if I was going to say what I like to do, it's funny because I would have started off saying originally I liked horror because of the predictive stuff. But I think now a lot of times what I really kind of enjoy, and I still really do enjoy doing horror because horror, you get a chart of a specific question and you get a specific, like, for example, somebody the other day was asking me, will he leave his wife and have a relationship with me? Now, you don't almost never need a horror for the answer for that one, which is going to be no, he's not leaving her. But that's okay. What the horror said. But what I've kind of come to right now, it's a lot of fun, is natal. and specifically what I call my traditional psychological reading, which is kind of funny. When I look at somebody's chart, I can get such an interesting portrait of the person's psyche and personality. I think that's really interesting to do. You can get a sense of their strengths and their weaknesses. I had some the other day that was really interesting. They had like every planet. They had like 5 planets or 4 planets in Leo. So it's like Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Jupiter in Leo combust, right? And then they had squaring Saturn in Scorpio and then opposed to their Aquarius moon. So I was like, wow, what a chart. I mean, that's somebody the Leo is really, that's had just such a strong Leo influence in that chart. And they're sort of out of balance because of that, because with so many planets in one sign, right? That Leo-ness would have been really strongly pronounced in their chart. So it's harder for that person to be balanced. And then, of course, you got the moon opposed to it, right? So that's a little difficult. The opposition stuff is not an easiest energy to deal with. And that's the same thing that Zoller had, that Leo Aquarius opposition. And then it's Saturn and Scorpio. It's like it's not afflicted in Scorpio, but Scorpio is a difficult sign. So like, wow, that's an interesting person. And it would have been, that was really kind of, because recently I've been getting a lot of charts where people are more balanced. They have a nice sort of spread of all 4 elements, air, fire, and water. And, they have one planet at least one planet in each sign, and they're dignified and stuff. So you can see, well, this person tends to be either water, for example, they tend to be more emotional, but they have some balancing factors. So it's really interesting. Each person is a gestalt. You know what I mean? Each person is this unity, right? And the strengths they have are their weaknesses, right? And it's everything sort of balances out that way, and it's the same thing. Like if you look at like relationships, those are fun to do too. One of the things I like to do is what's called the complete relationship reading. Complete relationship reading is a horary. What's our relationship going on? What's going on in the relationship? And then you compare the natal charts. And those are really cool because the horary gives you that overall, are you going to have a relationship or not? And I had someone just email before I did the podcast and they said, well, you did a horary, and this is with a person who was, I think it was the, would he leave his wife thing? She's like, I want a more in-depth reading. In other words, she wasn't really liking that horary because it said no. And natal's the real thing too. I mean, I'll get a real reading with a natal reading. That's the real thing. And I told her, I said, look, the horary gives you the best answer as far as the concrete event and the specifics. I said, natal is very general. And I'm not going to be able to say what the outcome of a specific relationship is from a natal chart. But the psychological interaction can be really interesting. You'll see how the positives and negatives are reflected, or people are together because they have like negatives in common, or they have, right. they fit together badly, they reinforce each other's negative qualities or whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of, and so when you do the horary, you get one perspective, and then the natal is another perspective. So it's kind of cool to look at the chart, the situation from these different charts and different perspectives. So that's what I would say I kind of been enjoying now, is being able to kind of, it's all the same. It's all the synthesizing, because unlike the most modern science or whatever you're looking at, they're all into analysis. The idea is you break everything down to those little bits, right? And then you look at the bit, and the meaning adheres in the bit, and I like synthesis. I like to be able to put together the overall patterning.
I would say that is in a way the essence of the art of astrology. No, I think that's really great. And it's really wonderful how you explained your approach, your stemming from Renaissance and medieval astrology. For me, I really love doing natal work myself and relationship readings. But and here we may argue, but about some stuff here. But let's get into it. So as you know, the root of what I would consider to be my serious practice comes from the studies I did with Jeffrey Wolf Green's School of Evolutionary Astrology. And to me, I think his work was one of the most absolutely profound types of astrological knowledge out there. And originally his work, his kind of philosophical foundation is more coming out of Vedanta, or maybe we would call it Neo-Vedanta. stuff, out of lineage in South Asia, Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, and Yogananda, especially, and such. So the idea of rebirth is taken as a given, right? That basically we live many lives, and what he would call the soul with a capital S gives rise to different lives. And so the birth chart, Western tropical natal chart, is a way where you can actually see this. It's basically kind of a map of in essence, where a person's coming from. In Buddhist terms, we could say there are keys to sort of alaya vijnana in the chart, meaning a storehouse of a karmic storehouse, and how this gives rise to the current life and the current life dynamics. And he was really profoundly psychological and spiritual. And one of the most powerful aspects about it is that you can very clearly delineate aspects of a person's prior life history and the formative factors and impulses which have helped configure them, and the current life's trajectory, and the sort of what he would call the evolutionary lessons. And so, what you're here to do, what you're here to experience, and really identifying this stuff and communicating it to people. That's really my favorite thing. Now, check this out. Since you were speaking so much about Robert Zoller, years ago, I don't remember how long ago, I came upon a book, and it was a book of interviews with renowned astrologers. And I believe the guy who wrote the book and did the interviews was, and forgive me if I'm getting this wrong because I don't remember. I think the guy's name was Gary Phillips or Phillipson,
Yeah, yeah, right.
and he was an English, or is
Yeah.
an English guy, and
Did
I
stuff on
believe.
SkyScript. He's got a bunch of
Okay,
things on
yeah, and he
SkyScript.
was wonderful, and I think he was also a Theravada monk. So he was a Buddhist monk, and so he had compiled this book of interviews. And so, did you read the interview with Robert Zoller? Because
I
that was
think I
one of.
have read it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the chapters. And I checked this out because I always remembered this. I'm going to have to find it to actually check. I should have actually looked at it before bringing it up. But so at one point, and again, I may be getting certain details wrong, but what I recall is that at one point, the interviewer asks Zoller about evolution, or the topic of evolution as a concept comes up, and Robert Zoller in his reply stated something like I'm not a fan of evolution. And as you can imagine, he's certainly not. I believe we can safely infer that Robert Zoller was not a fan of evolutionary astrology or any modern astrology, right? But he said about the term evolution, evolution, it implies a transformation from a lower state to a higher, and it's not clear to me that this is something that necessarily is appropriate in the human condition, or is ubiquitous. So I don't really see the need to include that term necessarily in
Well,
anything. But check this out. But during the course of the interview, I think Phillipson, that was his name. He basically, asked Zoller to speak about his life, and he provided a great deal of biographical material and biographical details. And the first thing that struck me is that what Robert Zoller said was really an absolutely clear illustration of the type of evolution we mean when we in evolutionary astrology, meaning he discussed his own spiritual journey, and how his own life challenges and all kinds of factors came together to lead him down various spiritual pursuits and esoteric sciences and learning and such, but basically bringing him to, in a way, discard the limited Robert Zoller that he had been, and basically open up to serious spiritual transformation. And I thought it was actually quite a beautiful illustration.
so let me rant off that.
Sure, man. Yeah, go
So,
for it.
okay. So, if we're talking about, again, we'll go back to worldview. We're talking about the modern worldview, right? The atheistic materialistic worldview. And it has certain organizing principles, right? And so evolution is one of those principles. Okay. So evolution is basically in the physical sphere, and you could talk about progress in the cultural sphere, right? And so it's very basically eschatological. This has come from the Christian view. It's just like, have a beginning and then you go into a specific end, right? And so we start out, in the evolution, you've you got chemicals, you got amino acids, right? And they form cells, and then the cells, everything evolves, right? And it becomes more and more complex. And then here we are. Look, obviously we're the height of evolution. We're the peak,
Obviously.
right? And same thing with culture, right? We started off with this very primitive culture, and now we have this incredibly evolved culture, right? And so we are so superior. And that's, was it Perry? I was reading about that. Someone sent me this thing, and he's like, that the traditional astrology is such garbage. Wait, and we've evolved. Someone sent me this whole essay by what's Perry? You know who he is? What's his first name? He's a
psychologist,
psychological astrologer, right? And he was like, he's like predictions unethical, psychological astrology all the way. But he said, that the traditional astrology was bogus because it was unevolved. And it's like, we're very highly evolved. And so, and it's the whole rapture thing too. Like, and what's going to happen is we're going to have this singularity, and we'll all be, in different species or something, or we'll all, whatever, we're heading for it though. And I have faith, with all the rest of my hippie friends, that everything's going to be great. It's like, here's what I would say about it is that from a scientific standpoint, evolution is this random process, mindless stuff, and just shit happens, right? And if you say there's a purpose behind it, they really hate that. That really gets them upset if you say it's for a purpose. So when you talk about evolution with a spiritual purpose involved, you get the frisson of the science, because people like science. It's like Christian Science or Scientology or something. You get that nice label of science, which adds prestige, but then you can add but it's this eschatological thing too. So that fits in with our preconceptions. So this is the kind of, now I would say the evolution in the sense of this movement from the one to the many, and then from the many to the one. It's really sort of the breathing in and breathing out of existence, right? Is that you have the one manifests as a multiplicity, right? And then the multiplicity recognizes that it's the one, okay? And so, and that's the essence really of evolution so you've got a devolution and an evolution. So it's that return path, that's what evolution is. And I think you can see that if you look at, I was just reading today about star nurseries, which are these regions of space with interstellar gas collapsing, and then it ignites the star, a lifetime. Like, that's where you get stars from. It's like, wow, that's really cool. And it's like, that's just part of this whole process, right? And so I do think there's evolution. I do think that there's a definite tendency. That's what life is. I mean, you have increasing complexity and of all sorts of different things, of culture, of behavior, of whatever, and so, and look at how beautiful, like a hawk, look how beautiful that is. I mean, evolution produces some incredible things. So that I do think that's true. Whether or not as a culture we're evolving, I think is highly questionable. And so I think that it's definitely a possibility that's open for certain people, right? If that's your thing, that's what you, it's like being a farmer though. I mean, it doesn't have to be a farmer, but if you're a farmer, if you're an evolving person, you evolve, that's cool. And, but if you look at society as a culture, I mean, in 2021, I don't think you can go, oh, we're so evolved. I mean, it's so patently obvious that all we have is high tech, and we're screwing that up too. It's like, are we more spiritually evolved than the Middle Ages? I don't think so. I mean, you've got our basic philosophy is this atheistic, materialistic nihilism. I mean, that's not very spiritual. And just the way we treat each other. I mean, the genocide, all the hatred and evil and all this sort of stuff. It's like, we have a high degree of technology, and otherwise we're just a bunch of smart monkeys,
right? And
what would you expect giving dynamite to a bunch of monkeys?
Right. Who have the assumption that, the foundation of a culture should be money and whatever will give us power that we could.
But it doesn't even matter. You could go to Middle Ages, right? They didn't have their shit together either. I mean, they had more spiritual philosophy, but they had also, I mean, these is the problem is that the technology just magnifies the positives and the negatives, and it doesn't, the root. Now, on the other hand, there's all sorts of really cool spiritual beings, right? So the capability is out there for you as an individual, if you want to embrace that. But this idea that we as a culture are somehow, and on the new age thing of like, oh, there'll be a spiritual, thing, and we'll all be enlightened, and enlightenment will be so wonderful for everybody. And it's like, I don't think so. I think you have I had this teacher who was like, we have more enlightened people than ever. I'm like, not as a percentage, I don't think. I mean, it's
Right.
interesting because there's a guy named Bankai who was a Zen teacher, and he was in 17th century Japan, and he used to have hundreds, thousands of people would show up to his lectures, and because they wanted to become enlightened. They knew about it. I mean, even Zen, if you're in Japan in the 17th century, right? It wasn't that hard to find out about enlightenment, and it was a real thing for them, and you could actually achieve it too. You just have to find a master. Whereas nowadays, it's like, despite all our technology, you got to fight through a tremendous amount of disbelief, right? And like I said, atheism, materialism, to get to the point where you're even open to the Dharma.
Without
right?
a doubt.
You can hear it, but you can't accept it.
Sure. And so many, you've really opened up a lot of rich areas we could go into. I mean, one being, just as maybe as an aside, how technology that it is not this neutral thing that we as a collective, that we wield, that it changes us. And I think,
well, it's made to do, like a gun is made to shoot.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
You're not gonna be able to change the light bulb with a gun. I mean, it's like technology, and it's not neutral. There's no question about it. I mean, and you have a technology that's created in a predatory society. It's predatory. I mean, it's just like, that's just how it is. I mean, it's funny because Age of Aquarius, I was reading this book about, this friend sent me this article about the AI, where you pull together all like the surveillance cameras and all the police reports and all the information you have, and all of a sudden the cops have like all this information, and it's like, that's Aquarian too. I mean, it's dancing hippies, but it's also vast networks of command and control.
Interesting.
And that's kind of the problem of Aquarius. Is a very weird, because I have a strong Aquarius. It's very interesting sign.
Without doubt. Let's talk a bit about this. In a way, I kind of hesitate to say some stuff because I'm gonna, if I have your permission to use the word archetype in association with signs as a way of communicating with people.
And I mean, I think that's really like, really, if you look at Jung's use of archetypes, essentially what I think those is platonic ideas, right? Because the real question is, where does the archetype reside? Now, if you're an atheistic materialist, you say, well, it's cultural, it's in the brain, the brain's secreting it, it's a mental image, it's from the neurons or whatever.
Sure.
If you want to say platonic idea, right? Those aren't anywhere else, right?
Well,
what they are is relationships,
right? Yes.
And so the relationship, like for example, the fatherhood, right? As soon as you had the one-celled creature that put a little bit of genetic material into another one, right? You have sexual reproduction, boom, everything else happened. I mean, it's a potentiality.
Exactly.
Right?
Sure.
It's a relationship. And so I see fathers and sons, but I don't see fatherhood directly. But nevertheless, that relationship is always there. As long as you have fathers and sons, you always have fatherhood.
Without a doubt.
Platonic ideas.
No, that's great. And the thing is, not to get sidetracked from what I was going to say, but
that's archetypes. As I said, go ahead and use archetypes.
Well, check it out.
It very much is what they are.
Well, I have kind of a whatever, I don't say pet peeve, but a thing about it, because I felt like in the 90s and the early 2000s, we were like archetype to death, like the archetype of this and the archetype of that, and the new book about archetypal blah 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 and archetype. I've also was drawn to and am involved to a degree with what's called archetypal psychology and stuff. But anyways, for what I was going to say is, with respect to the archetype of Aquarius, if we're going to speak about that, Jeffrey Wolf Green, I had some really great insights about it. And I think I brought this up with you, but I want to take it a little further. So basically, he would start talking about it and say, the thing about Aquarius, well, is number one, it centers upon similarity and difference, and especially difference. And basically, he related it to humanity, right? And he's saying, we each will seek to be drawn to what we feel might be like us in a way. And so we have a formation of groups. And so we have an Aquarian archetypal process in human terms. Very often would consist of someone having types of life experiences in which they are learning through various ways what makes them unique and different, and then also what they have in common with other people. And this is sort of the basis, a fundamental kind of basis of the formation of groups. Um, the thing is, what I was going to say is, often I remember in certain traditional texts, they would talk about Aquarius as being the most humane sign. Is that in Lily, or do I have to go older? Okay. And so, and of course, we often do see this in people with strong Aquarius signatures in their nativities, right? Is that there are a lot of humanitarian or humanistic impulses in Aquarius. Interestingly, though, and Jeffrey, I think,
They
was
have the negatives of the human
they
too.
have the negatives of it,
I mean, like
exactly.
an animal
Yes,
doesn't, I mean, think of a pet,
yes,
right? You
yes.
don't have the negative, you don't, they're out there. They don't have that hidden shit. And so it's like they have the vices and the virtues of
Right,
humans.
right. Yeah, yeah. And so, in a way, if we could look at Aquarius as sort of a polar or a dual archetype, right? In
They
terms
all
of,
are.
yeah, they all are.
I
But
mean,
in
you're going to
terms,
look at all the signs as
right, right.
having that.
Right. So if we have, commonality and the masses, and then we have groups, right? Different groups that can comprise collectivities, right? And so we have yeah, the common, an idea of the common and universal, and then we also have an elite and groups, because that's a group as well. People who see that they're like other. If I'm a person of power and wealth, or whatever it is, and I see this in others, that forms a group. Yes, and so you can think of it as whatever, in terms of a pyramid, like Jeffrey would present these ideas. But I'm just saying, we see in the so-called idea of age of Aquarius, and at one point we should actually start talking about this idea of astrological ages and such, and the great year and all that stuff, but maybe we'll wait another time. But I mean, people who know nothing or not even interested in astrology, surely most people have heard the term the age of Aquarius, and like we're living in it now. I mean, obviously, or the opening fucking gates
Well,
to
I
it,
think, I guess what I would say though is I like Aquarius. I mean, obviously, I was to say one thing about Aquarius is that, I mean, Aquarius, like Scorpio, is a sign that really sort of fascinates me because I think there's a lot of depth to it. So, for example, I have Aquarius rising, I have a Saturn in Aquarius rising, Moon in Aquarius rising, Mercury in Aquarius rising. So I have a really, really strong Aquarian side. And so, um, in a traditional astrology, Saturn rules Aquarius.
right.
Okay, so that starts us off in terms of our inquiry, in terms of understanding Aquarius. So Saturn is naturally cold and dry, right? I mean, he's the furthest away of planets. He's solitary study, longevity, crazy old man, beggar, homeless person, smelly stuff, but also occult philosophy, wisdom, things like that.
That which is
So
beyond
yeah,
normal.
the normal, exactly.
Yeah,
So in both a positive and negative way.
right.
So Aquarius is interesting because one thing I like to say about Aquarians is that they tend to be very humanitarian, right? But they're more interested in humanity than individuals. And they're actually, like any air sign, kind of cold.
Mm.
They don't have that emotional connection as much to people. They
Because it's
can be
about
rather,
distance as well,
yeah.
Aquarius.
And
Yes.
it's funny because one of the things as an Aquarian type, I mean, I'm Sun Pisces, so I'm not entirely Aquarian, is that I always wanted to be unique. I always had this incredible drive to do my own thing. And so there's an independence there. There's a
Right.
rebelliousness there. There's a stubbornness there. It's a fixed sign. You can see I'm keying off of the traditional stuff with it, even though I'm doing psychological.
Right.
So
To
I'm a little
clarify,
less abstract because I was noticing that stuff is like, I think what you said was true, but my preference is a little more,
specific, getting,
concrete.
okay.
But it's just like whether you like chocolate or you like ice cream, because nevertheless, what you're saying about the evolutionary psychology approach, I didn't have any disagreement with. You know what I mean? But it's just less of a way. I tend to be a little, even though, like I said, even though I'm doing psychology, I like to. Now, here's one of the things about Aquarius. Leo. I had a friend who was like all Leo. I think he had every single planet but one in Leo, and he loved cats. For example, he loved cats. He was incredible because he was a very generous, noble guy when he felt like it. but he was the most self-centered person, like a cat. He's the most self-centered person I've ever met. And he was totally combative. I mean, it's just interesting how he really conformed to that. So Leo is very, very, not just selfish, they're the center of reality. Everybody else revolves around them. They have to be the center of attention too, you know? And so there's an incredible selfishness, even beyond selfishness with them, because it's not even, anyone else isn't even real to them. They're the only ones, it's like solipsism. But the funny thing about Aquarians are, they're like that. Even though they have this whole, oh, I'm a humanitarian, and, you know, they're not trying to dominate everything all the time like a Leo, obviously, they still like to run everything, right? Like Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, you know, the Bolsheviks,
Sure.
That's very Aquarian.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
That revolutionary thing, it's all good except when they come around to lining you up against the wall and shooting you because you're kind of revolutionary. I mean,
Right.
they're perfectly willing to do that because it's for the greater good, you know?
Exactly.
And so this is the thing about it is that, and so that's where you get the weirdness of Aquarians being very traditional and yet very avant-garde. It's a really weird combination of some, and that's the way I am. I mean, like I said, you got all this traditional astrology and I'm doing all this crazy extra cutting edge stuff as well. So I think that it's really, for me, what it's fun to do is, I think the insight of modern astrology, that the planets and the signs and everything were a map of the psyche, right? Because you get character analysis in traditional astrology, but they just didn't have that conception of it, right? That's not how they organized it. I think it's a really great insight, and that's why I use it all the time, because it really isn't a very accurate mapping of psychology. And so it's actually one of the things that's most impressive. When I do a natal reading, people are just blown away by the psychological insights. And when you say what I love to do, I like to look for the shadow. When I look at someone's chart, I always think it's very interesting to see the shadow side, you know, the hidden side, and that's complementary. You know, like I said, it's somehow, it's sort of like with a relationship. A lot of times relationships will be so, like if you're an Aquarian, you know, like, or like if you're Saturn, like my wife is sort of Scorpionic, so I have a very strong Saturn grounded approach, and she's got this more kind of Scorpionic wild energy thing. But she likes me too because she likes the grounding. You know what I mean? That sort of works in terms of the relationship. Now we've toned it down. You have to, you know, it doesn't work if you don't tone it down. But so that's what I say is that I think that despite the fact that, oh, I'm Mr. Traditional, I really do love, you know, the modern. Now, here's the thing. What I think is important to do is, the problem with, I think with a lot of modern stuff is, first of all, the worldview. And second of all, that they only have one tool in their toolkit. You open up the toolbox and there's just natal psychological astrology in there, right? So they try to use it for everything, you know, and that style, it works for good for psychology, but doesn't work good for predictive stuff. So like, for example, people always coming to me going transits or whatever. I'm like, I can't do that. I mean, it can be done, I suppose, but I think horary is better. I mean, if someone says, well, I marry X, I'm like, you can look at their people always want me to do natal reading because that's what they've heard of. Not because that's the best way to do it, because they haven't heard anything else.
Exactly.
You know?
I understand.
And the first thing they've heard of grabs your attention, right? And so it's like, you know, if you hear about some particular thing, whole sign houses, for example, okay, that's it. I mean, that's going to be your thing for the rest of your life. Probably you'll have a difficult time disengaging yourself from the first thing you heard about it.
Right.
And so that part of the problem with the other types of astrology is that, you know, there's a lot of other, or if you go to another thing, like if you go from natal to horary, the approach is different, even in traditional.
Very much so.
You can't just take one and everything you learned and move it over to that.
Exactly.
You have to take each one on its own terms.
Yes, it's a different system. And I just kind of, you made me think of a few things. One thing is what I was describing with, you know, for instance, the Aquarius archetype and such. I mean, that's, you know, it's not like I'm going to necessarily bring that into an individual's chart who I'm reading, you know, doing a reading for, who has a lot of Aquarian signatures or something like that. It's just, I focus on a lot of abstract stuff because that's what I sit around and think about a lot of the times. But
that anyway, brings up an interesting point I should make at this point. I was just saying that there is a tremendous amount that you can do looking at astrological information and cycles and things from a contemplative or meditative standpoint. You can get all sorts of useful information about the sort of structure of reality, thinking about these different structures, right? And thinking about these various things. That's a whole different thing from being able to predict with that. Just because
Okay.
you came up with an insight that's true philosophically that gives you a lot of information doesn't mean you can look at a chart and then that will be used as a predictive technique.
Exactly. Not
That's
necessarily.
something that people don't get. They're like, oh, I thought up this great thing and it really makes a lot of, I'm going to do this. I'm like, it may or may not work. And that's one of the things I liked about traditional astrology is you've got about 1,000-year track record
Right.
of stuff
Yes.
being used. And that's if you want to predict. I mean, that's the thing is that and that's the tendency is like, well, I've got this thing. I know astrology uses it for prediction, so I'm going to use this for prediction. I'm like, well, that may or may not work, even if, like I said, you got a
Mhm.
valid psychological insight off of it or a philosophical insight off of it, it may not necessarily translate into a predictive technique that
That's
works.
very true. I'd like to say a few things just for the benefit of people who may not have that much familiarity with it. Because as I kind of said last time, although I'm an astrologer, in one sense, I'll just say it. In one sense, I don't really give a fuck about astrology. I give a fuck, but yet I do. Yeah, but yet also astrology is incredible and wonderful. But yet I don't give a fuck about it in a way. But yet there are. But here I'll push for it in a way right now. That I mean, there. If you're looking, well, let me back up. There's a lot of bullshit out there in any realm, in any domain that we might consider to be significant, right? But there's the real stuff too, whatever music. I always go back to music in a way as an analogy. If you took, if we could agree on certain definitions of music that of quality, high quality music, let's say we could kind of more or less argue it out and agree on certain things, it would be like a tiny percentage of the vast, ages of even recorded music that's out there. But still, it would be so much that, we could never even listen to it in like 50 lifetimes, So, but my point being, the the astrology that is efficacious, that is authentic, that is real, the spiritual work, the magical work that is real, this stuff is just fantastic. And so when exploring these things, you never want to give up your analytical mind and inquiry into such, because you have to discriminate when you start moving into things and checking things out. That said, there are a lot of the traditional forms of astrology and ancient astrology that often center around making accurate predictions. There are also forms of astrology that are very tied into uh, religious or spiritual practices. For instance, something like Jyotish, which we tend to call Vedic astrology here, right? Which it's very often paired with Ayurveda and yoga, an entire medical tradition, which I know, and maybe you could say something about this too, about traditional medical astrology and stuff. There are forms of astrology that tied to Buddhism, which you could get a reading from someone that will tell you about um, what sadhanas, what spiritual practices you ought to be doing,
Hmm.
what deities, if it's a form of Buddhism
Hmm.
involving deities, which deity practices you should do and why, what your main spiritual practice should do, what your there are these things that exist, and it's just really wonderful to get into this stuff. And so, anyways, I'm eclectic, but I hope not a Frankenstein. But we get
I
into that
think you
another
want to
time.
do it. And here's what I'd say about it is that
Yeah.
I try to get initiated in the tradition, and it's like I've often done it formally, right? But I think it's just sort of a sign of respect. Like, for example, I'm doing Hail Marys, but I was baptized,
Hmm.
right? So I've been initiated as a Christian, which is kind of funny.
Are
And
you Catholic? As a converted
no, I don't,
Catholic?
I'm not, it was a Protestant
Okay. Which
denomination.
which denomination do you?
What's the difference? They're all the
Oh,
same. It's
okay.
Protestantism is all just like, I mean, I really feel like there was a mistake, the Reformation. Now, I tell you who I really like are like the Anabaptists. That's like the Mennonites or the Amish
Yeah.
or whatever. I mean,
Right.
what they did is they took that Presbyterian, that Protestant stuff and said, we're going to take this to the nth degree, right? We're going to be like, we don't even have a church, right? We don't have a clergy, right? We're totally pacifist, right? And we totally depend on, because see, the thing is like everybody had stuff they wouldn't give up. Like the Catholics pretty much held on to everything. I mean, they got angels, they got the mass, like blessing of the pets. They still do that kind of stuff. They got exorcism. I mean, that's cool. I like that stuff. But see, the Protestants said, okay, we'll give up this, but not that. Like the Lutherans, like, well, we still have bishops, but we don't want to do saints, and old saints are okay, but we're not going to have any new ones. But so that stuff, I'm like, basically they ended up being atheist. But they basically said, you know what? I kind of don't believe in this, but I'm going to give up a little bit of a time until, one of the funky things about modern people is that they're atheistic materialist in their approach, and they believe in God, but that's it. The only spiritual being is God. That's all there is, which is just so weird to me. I have such a weird medieval approach because I'm like, of course there's like a gazillion spiritual beings, and you never talk to God directly because that would just, you'd be annihilated. You couldn't have contact with the total power of the universe. You know what I mean? You just disappear. And so, but like I said, I still have been baptized. So it's like, I got that. I did Buddhism. Like I got way into Buddhism, the Zen Buddhism. I had actually what's called Jukai, which is taking the precepts in both Soto Zen Buddhism and then also in the Shingon, which is the tantric style of Japanese. And I also had Abhisheka, the Kechin Kanjo, which is like a ritual it's like a tantric ritual. So I haven't done anything much with it, but at least I have been initiated in the tradition. And then the Shinto, it's weird because I haven't exactly been initiated in it, but I did go to temples and do all that kind of stuff. Actually, no, I had some ceremonies done. I went to the Abi no Seme, who's a really famous magician, Japanese. I went to and had a ceremony at his shrine when we were in Kyoto. That was pretty cool. So I don't know if I've exactly been initiated in that, but I take it really seriously. I'm into it. And then Sufism, I was initiated into that. So I think what that is not that's like required, but it's useful as a way of saying I'm making a commitment. Like I'm serious enough about your stuff. I'm not just dabbling. I respect it and I'll follow along. Now at the same time, I mean, all the stuff, I'm not involved with any of it in a conventional way. Like the Zen stuff, which is probably what I got most into, I just couldn't face. My lineage was so I didn't know how to even put it. They don't believe in enlightenment. It's the weirdest freaking thing. I mean, like there's Zen Buddhist, right? And they don't even think you can be enlightened, and they don't even know what that is, right? So I'm like, that I couldn't get with. And in order to be a priest, I was serious about wanting to be a priest, but it was like too much of a sacrifice in terms of the just being so conventional with it. I couldn't hack it. So I'm in this weird limbo of like, I've had the Jukai, so I've got the initiate. I'm like, someone said I was a lay priest. I'm like, okay, I like that. It's like it's very mercurial, which is neither one or the other. Lay priest is a crazy idea. That's like both. That's like dry water or something, But that's very much to my taste because I have a strong Mercury, so I like to be neither one or the other. But that's what I would say about it is that what I like to do is, I had a teacher said you don't dig a well with a bunch of shallow holes. So you want to have a deep penetration, but at some point you end up having a certain amount of syncretism. I mean, you're going to be doing it. And we're certainly in a syncretistic period nowadays. There's so much stuff available and so much going on. What I've been getting into really big recently was non-dual tantra, which is that Kashmiri Shaivism kind of, that's used to be called that, but that's not really the right term for it. But it's a lot of this sort of like 13th or 14th century tantric stuff.
So could you say a little bit more introductory
it's non-dual
remarks about?
It's non-dual. So non-dual is, ultimately believes in one. That's the basis of it, is there's one. The interesting thing about the tantric non-dual is that it's that Shiva Shakti thing. So there's still a strong I, right? But it's like, who are you, right? You are really Shiva. Whoops, sorry about that. You are Shiva, right? And so I was having some really tripping on that recently, in terms of like, but it's a consciousness based, right? Everything is consciousness.
Is that what drew you to it?
Yeah, but it's non-dual too.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was tripping. Now, one of the things I like about Buddhism is anatta, which is no self, right? That just blows everybody away. I mean, people don't even want to hear it. That's just like, I mean, it's amazing. Like in the Zen Center, I used to go, we used to have Zen Center like a half a block from us. And I used to go there, and they're Zen Buddhists, right? And I'd be like, so I just talk about no self, and the people are just like, just turn around and leave. You know, they don't want to have any of that crazy garbage. And it's just one of those things. It's like, even if you're open to it, it's extremely hard. And I'm not even in that state. You know, I mean, I've had a bunch of flashes of it, a bunch of Kensho experiences, but so I think that, but the non-dual isn't no self. It's just that you're not Chris, you know, you're not Andy, you're Shiva. So that's like, ooh, that's some really trippy stuff. And so creation, for example, I was reading about the other day, was like, okay, creation, when the one contracts itself, it believes that it takes on this persona of limitation, right? But nevertheless, the same process of creation takes place. So we think of consciousness as like we become aware of things outside of us, right? That's how we think of it. In fact, what's happening is you're creating everything. So the experience you're having right now, you are creating it, right? So yeah, it's Shiva again. You're the creator. But see, if you think of yourself as I'm the little self, I'm the body, I'm the little guy behind my head, you know. Except for some Men in Black, there was an alien who was like a little tiny guy inside. That's how people think of it. Like, I'm really behind. If you think of where are you, I'm like kind of about 6 inches behind my eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, or I'm my body, you know, or I'm the mind, you know. And you can do a process of inquiry and think about that. It's like, for example, okay, if I lose my finger, do I stop being me? No, I'm just me without my finger. If I lose my thumb, am I myself? No, you know, I'm still me. I'm losing my hand. And you just start, so you just look at all the different parts of the body, right? And you're like, no, that's my hand, right? If it's your hand, it's not you, it's yours. So then you get to the brain, and that's a little more complicated. Like, so my teacher would section it, right? And you do that, and you just like, you can't find yourself. If you look for yourself, you're not gonna be able to find yourself. If you really do, on my body, I'm like, okay, well, let's go a little more deeper inquiry into that. And so that was one of the great things about my teacher, Fred Davis, who is the non-American modern non-dual teacher of mine. Is he's excellent at that. He's like the king of non-dual inquiry. And he's so adept at doing that, you know, walking you through that inquiry process. And,
Right.
and giving you a Kensho experience. I mean, about probably 90% of the people that do the sessions with him do us. He says waking up. I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. I call it a Kensho experience. Kensho experience is a taste of reality, right? It's a taste of no self. It's a taste of the ultimate. And but it's awakening gives this sort of sense of like it's permanent and it's all encompassing, when it's really more like a lightning flash. But nevertheless, that Kensho experience, I mean, in Rinzai Zen, they insist on that to start, right? It's sort of like a black belt. Like when you do karate or whatever, everything up to the black belt is sort of preliminary.
Mm-hmm.
But the black belt is just like a GED. You know what I mean? If you don't have your GED, you really can't do anything else, but it's only a GED. So Kensho experience is a GED, right? Spiritually speaking. It's not the, you know, you're not a Buddha. And now, of course, you're always a Buddha. We all are a Buddha. You know, everything's Buddha, right? It's just you're not consciously at this moment aware of it. That's all. So it's like, if you could become consciously aware of your true nature, then there you go. You wouldn't change anything. This is it. I mean, this is it right now. This is perfect. Like, no, it's not fucking perfect, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, you're just looking at it from a different perspective. If you're able to, basically, if you stop being you, that's what I say. It's funny about the chart. People come to me and they're like, well, can I escape? Well, first of all, it's funny the big karma. They think karma is something big. And I'm like, no, everything's freaking karma. Can you see karma in the chart? I mean, the whole chart is karma. Everything's karma. It's a map. That's what I was saying about, you're talking about the evolutionary thing. I'm like, I'm a little skeptical of talking about people's past lives, just because how do you test it? It's like, well, I was Cleopatra, then I was a donkey for 100 lives. I mean, how are you going to know? You could say anything you want, and there's no way of testing that. Nevertheless, I do think it's correct to say that karma is that's just a map of your karmic map, right? And so there are people like the Buddha, one of his cities, which is powers, was he could see all his past lives. So I don't question that as impossible. Now,
well, I don't give names and places and biographical.
But I don't question that the chart that you have is a map for your current manifestation, and that it's a result of your previous karma. There's no question in my mind about that. Whether or not, like I said, that you can, because people ask, you do past life astrology? I'm like, no, dude, because like I can't test it.
I
I'm not
understand.
saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's like, I don't have any way of knowing, of validating it. So that's, but
I
anyhow,
understand.
so the karma, people will say to me, well, because they don't like their second house is afflicted. Like, well, how can I get rid of that? Like I said, you can escape your karma, you escape your destiny by not being you. If you stop being you, you don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. But that's people like, no. I mean, because your full frame of reference is the I, right? I think, therefore I am. Wait a second, where's the I come from? That's a huge jump to get to I, right? And so, and then once you're I, then there's I, and there's everything else, and I mean, that's
Hmm.
that primal process. And
Right. Yes.
in Buddhism, this idea of ignorance, basically it starts with agitation. So there's this, like, you have all consciousness, undifferentiated consciousness, and then you have this agitation. And so that's what is like agitation, and then activity, and this whole, I have to go through all the steps. They always like the steps, the specific stuff, but that's what it is. It's like I, other, and then you have the Tao, and then the one, and the two, then the three, and then the 10,000 things, and that's that process of man. And that's happening not a billion years ago, but right in every instant, right? Because you're like recovering into your true state, Tathagata, the Buddha-ness, every moment that consciousness is giving forth that process, right? And it's like, this is all sounds like, oh, that sounds great. And I'm like, no, you can experience that, and that's what the astrology did for me, was that it said to me, this atheistic materialistic view of reality is wrong. At least it's wrong in that it's not the complete reality. It's
Right.
certainly true for pieces, right? Discrete chunks of things conform to that pretty well, right? But it's not a good overview model for a lot of other stuff, in
Sure.
my opinion. And it's like, that was, and that and psychedelic drugs. I mean, and that sort of started me off on the, because once you see that because like I said, the astrology and magic are the practical applications of these spiritual insights, of these spiritual
That's
philosophies.
kind of what I was
If they
just
work,
thinking.
if they
Yes.
work, then that validates the philosophy. Just like people think, well, because technology work, that validates, the atheistic materialism. It's like, yeah, to a certain extent, it does. I mean, in the physical realm, there's these physical laws, and you're like, air conditioning is really cool. Do you know anything about air conditioning? It's all physics. It has to do with compression. When you compress gases, then you have it sucks up energy. It makes it cold. It's really cool. I mean, the whole, like, you can run a refrigerator on propane. It sounds crazy. How can you make cold out of burning things, right?
Right.
But no, it runs the compressor, and it does all this stuff. So it's like, that's some amazing stuff. I'll read about things like, it's like with the star nursery and everything. It's like, wow, that's cool. The problem is, then you've got 2021, and we're all nuts, right? You've got all these people that are, and I don't want to get into any political stuff because I don't want to alienate anyone. I don't say anybody who can watch this can any political persuasion, but I'm just saying, you can agree that everyone's crazy, right? We all can agree that at least I'm not crazy, but everyone else's politics are crazy. And it's sort of like, it's why scientists don't run things. I mean, they're not running things. Lawyers run things, right? But law is not scientific. Law is a really interesting. It's sort of applied philosophy. You
Hmm.
know, um, it's rhetoric. It's like, I mean, I like the law. I really enjoy because it's practical. That's really what it is. It's like practical justice is at its best. It's the power. It's the system too. I mean, that's what it's saying about it. But it's not science, right? And that's why we run things. That's why lawyers are in charge, is because it's a better way of running. I mean, it's the scientists, they just don't know how to deal with people. That whole mad scientist thing is that archetype. It's true. It's like, they're fine with their test tubes and shit, but it's like, when they actually have to deal with real people, they don't know how to deal with it, because people don't conform to the model that they use, right?
So,
So
right.
they blame people for that. Like, well, you're irrational. Like, no, no, no. You need a model that actually, if you're confused about what's happening, you need a new worldview or a new philosophical. Unless you're like,
Hmm.
everything that happens, you're like, no surprises to me, right? Then you need a new worldview. And that's what I find too. I mean, like, I'm surprised about stuff like, okay, I need to revise my view of reality. You know, I'm fine tuning that all the time. You know,
Right. And a magical path, magical practices, in addition to possibly helping you change stuff or get stuff really can enable a person to really experience these more profound realities and these aspects
I
of
think
life. If that's
you
not evident
do
from,
it, you do it because you love it.
Mhm.
Like, why do you become a musician? Well, so I can make money, impress girls, It's like, you don't do that. I
No,
mean, the stuff to devote yourself to something, it's just it. And here's the thing, you're pre-programmed. Like I said, you can look at your chart and I can't really necessarily tell. You could do after the fact. It's kind of hard to look and so, because I'm more generalized. I can say these 10 things are possible for you. But if you love something, you can generally look in the chart and see the signatures of it.
sure.
That's a little easier than predicting what, because people come to me and say, well, what should I do? Should I play the guitar or the saxophone? I'm like, I can't tell that from a natal chart. I can't get that detailed from it,
Right, right.
and but nevertheless, it's like the reason you do stuff, if you do it for something, I think you're not going to be that successful at it. And a lot of stuff that I did, I don't know why I did it. I just had to.
Hmm.
I had to do it, and
Exactly.
it's like, that's how I've been able to be successful at things and stuff like, I look at, for example, when I came to Iowa City, I was mostly doing astrology, but I was still a lawyer. And actually, there's a way, if you've been a lawyer for like 5 years or so, you don't have to take the bar exam. You just pay them this exorbitant fee, and then you can just what's called waiving in. So I did that. I thought, well, I don't want to give this up. There's a lot of work to get the legal stuff, the lawyer license. I'll just waive into Iowa. But I had no experience with Iowa. I knew nothing about it. I thought, I should do something to help people. So I had this buddy of mine who was having trouble with his landlord. And I'm like, okay, well, all right, we'll do the case. And I sort of half jokingly said, oh, we should do a class action. He said, yeah. And I'm like, okay. Which I mean, I've been peripherally involved in one class action that had nothing to do with landlord tenant. Never done a case in Iowa. I knew nothing about it. So I'm like, okay, let's just do it. And I turned into, like, now I'm like, somebody emailed me the other day, was a lawyer actually emailed me. She said, I understand that you're the guru of landlord tenant lawyers in Iowa. So it's like, how that happened, I don't know. But it was funny because I'd like to be a judge, but I said to my wife the other day, I said, first of all, I'm too weird to be a judge. And second of all, they need me doing what I'm doing. I mean, there's lots of people that could be decent judges,
I see.
but there's nobody else to do. Because I mean, I have the weirdest practice as a lawyer because I represent both landlords and tenants, which is really weird. I mean, normally you only represent landlords because they're the ones who can pay. But if you do represent tenants, you're like legal aid or something like that. But nobody does both, right? Because what I'm interested in is creating a positive, practical, fair landlord-tenant relationship, and helping people do that stuff, and making it work.
And so you
And
have to do
so,
it that way.
yeah, it's
Step into,
Aquarian. It's
right.
just my whole Aquarian thing. And it's like, but nevertheless, it's like I'm helping people all the time. And I do like I said, and not just, one of the things I don't like is what I call retail. Okay. Retail is like a soup kitchen. The retail way of dealing with poverty is a soup kitchen. Like, okay, you're poor, here, have some soup. I'm like, you're not getting at the root cause. I mean, you're leaving everything in place and it's like a Band-Aid at the end. And there's not saying there's nothing wrong with soup kitchens because you need them, but it's kind of locking the door after the horse is out. So what I like to do is try to go in and do the root stuff, right? The problem with that is the typical way of doing that is with a meat axe, right? And really, in order to make social change, what you need to do is, it's like those games with a stick stacked up. You reach in and pull one out without collapsing the whole thing. That's how it's really complicated. So, and what the fuck does that have to do with this? But it's like the wisdom that I've got, right, from my spiritual practice and the astrology and understanding of patterning and holes and everything comes into legal stuff, because when I'm trying to make social change, I'm recognized it's like there's this whole patterning that has to go on, and the wisdom and understanding that has to go through it. So, for example, let's just give an example. My big solution to the problems for landlords and tenants in Iowa, and this isn't for student tenants like we have in Iowa City, but it's for general residential tenants, is what's called a month-to-month lease. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, month-to-month lease is actually perpetual lease. It lasts forever. It just lasts until one or the other side gives 30 days notice, basically, and that ends it. But otherwise, it lasts forever. But if either side is unhappy with it, it's over. So instead of having a situation where people are like, oh, they won't fix this, blah, 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 they won't do this, or, complaining about the other side, there's no way to make them do the right thing. But if you say you can leave, like, all right, I'm out of here. That solves all landlord-tenant problems. You're like, you don't like the tenant? Give them notice. You don't like the landlord? Give them notice. But trying to make them do it. But that took me 10 years to figure that out. But that's actually a very effective solution to that problem. You know what I mean? And it's not ideological either. It's not right, it's not left. But it's like, how can these people together have a fair relationship? And how can we set up a fair? So very Aquarian. Like I said, if we're getting back to the Aquarian side of it, it's systematic. You can see how that's a deep, and it only works because it's like, it took me a long time. Because see, the standard approach is we need regulations, we need rules, we need a bureaucracy, we need penalties. None of that stuff works very effectively. We believe in it. It's like, but it actually, when push comes to shove, it actually hurts tenants because the tenants don't, it doesn't really, or it screws the landlord. It's like, and that's, you're not empowering people. That's such a cliche, but the beauty of my approach is that both sides, you don't need to go to anybody else. You don't need any punishment. You're like, I'm out of here. And that's how the relationship works. So it's like, but nobody likes it. I mean, that's another thing too. As I realized with selling this, like I was telling landlords, I'm like, this is really good for the overall, it's fair. They're like, they don't want to hear that. I'm like, it's good for you because you can get the tenant out. I'm like, okay, I'll go for that.
Sure. Sure.
But that's a very Aquarian sort of approach to stuff. And it's like, I've been blessed to be able to, because I was doing all this astrology, I could focus on that in my legal practice.
Exactly.
And so
do what you wanted, do what you call,
do what was the right thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the advantage of it. And so, but if you look at me in general, it's just very Aquarian. I'm just so weird. Right. I mean, nobody has this weird, but I like it that way. I mean, like, I want to be my own person. I want to do my own thing, and I want to be of service. I mean, that's just like an endless thing for me, is like, and that's Piscean too. So I want to be of service. So I think when you look at someone's chart, if you look at I don't give my chart out because I'm an astrological magician, but if you were to look at my chart, it's funny because Zoller said to me, because he did my reading along, 20 years ago, he said, you will be known for splitting hairs. And that's like Mercury in Aquarius. It's like super precision, right? And that is one of my things. I really am a big on precision, and the chart, what's wonderful about a natal chart is it really opens up the person, right? It's like having a Myers-Briggs. It's like having an incredible amount of information about them, but it's as a whole, it's the gestalt. It's a total thing. And once you see that with the individual person, then you recognize that reality is itself like that. We're made up of all these different gestalts, all these different wholes, like holon. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Sure.
A holon is a piece of a larger system, right? And then there's all these different linkages, right? Each, like a neutron is by itself, but also in an atom, which is itself in a molecule.
It's contained within.
Right, yes. Exactly. So there's this incredible wholeness and differentiation. And so that sort of contemplation is but it's useful because if I look at someone's chart and I'm like, okay, they're Leo, I'm like, I know something about that person.
Oh,
for
sure.
There's a lot of really useful, like I said, the stuff I do, it's like, oh, it's useful. I can get paid for it. Sometimes, I'm helping society. I mean, I'm doing all this stuff, I can predict. So there's all this really useful stuff you can get out of it. As long as you don't do that as your first, what I tend to say is like, I do what I do and get paid second. Because it's not like I'm doing us all 100% pro bono, you know what I'm saying? But my focus is not number one on do I get paid? It's number two on get paid. Because there are plenty of people that don't get paid at all and then they're screwed.
Right.
You know what I mean? I need to live. I have to pay my bills, right? But it's like, hopefully you're not going to be a doctor because of money. That's a little bit gross.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that you can't profit from same thing as an astrologer. It's like astrologers need to get paid and magicians need to get paid for what they do. And I think that's, we tend to think in modern is like, oh, you should never do anything for free. And it's like, yeah, that sounds good for me. I'll get it for free, sort of selfish, but it's not, the traditional view is that if you're a spiritual practitioner, it was worthwhile and you get paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the expectation that you would have to be doing it all for free.
Right. No, excellent points.
So we just wandered all over the place.
That's cool. That's what we're here for, man.
We did get back to Aquarius, though.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, but this is sort of an interest. Like I said, what's interesting about this is not just a bunch of just nonsense, right? That would be fun to believe in if it was true, but we know it's not. It's like, actually, it's empirically testable. Now, it's not as empirically testable as water freezes at 0 Celsius and boils at 100.
Precisely.
Right?
Exactly.
But nevertheless,
yes.
we need to be empirical about it and watch it. As well as being, one of the things I was going to post about is people are like, oh, I made this talisman with Jupiter and Pisces. And then, it was like, this happened. And I'm like, dude, I don't think you can necessarily say the causality there. I mean, that's just, I think it's questionable, and I can control. It's Jupiter in Pisces is really different from Jupiter in Sagittarius, but I noticed the third house, Pluto is in the third house, so that's really bad. Like, I just think that's way too much of an idea of control. I just don't think we're that, you know, that's questionable in my mind as to whether or not, first of all, they're way too focused on the effect. And second of all, I mean, they're trying to be empirical, but I have a skepticism as to whether or not you can be that clear on spiritual causality.
Right.
You know
Okay. So for people who may not know, the primary kind of magic that Christopher's talking about and that he teaches, astrological magic, centers upon the timing of rituals.
Yeah, you grab the moment.
You
Basically,
grab the moment.
you sort of like freeze the energy of a moment, so to
And
speak.
yes, and he's speaking about talismans, which Christopher also creates and sells, and sort of has really reintroduced, I think, to a whole new group
Yeah,
of
I mean,
people
before me,
over.
there wasn't anybody doing it, and now there's a lot more people. It's nice. I mean, it's great. When I was the only one, it was a little lonely, and now there's a lot of people that are interested in it, which is
Right.
great.
And so we have time doing things at certain moments, and then the use of images and creating certain images out of materials, right? And that's
And the
sometimes,
invocation of spirits too. I
and the
mean, really, what I
invocation.
would say is, what
Yes,
you do is when you choose a time that the spirit, the angel likes, that's appropriate to them, where they're strong, right? And then you make a talisman, and you essentially, I think of it as a portal to the spirit, or a cell phone number. But you could also think of it as a battery. You could charge it, or you could think of it as this talisman is ensouled by
sure.
the spirit. There's lots of different ways. I don't think any of those is right. It's just there's a different conceptual view of it. But I like the angelic practice. That's the saying, goes along with my more devotional approach, and
Right.
it's more focused on building up a long-term relationship with these particular celestial angels. But for astrological magic, you use astrological timing, and you only use astrological spirits. So that's basically a type of ceremonial magic, but it's timed astrologically, and then you do the invocation, but you limit it to astrological spirits.
Right. Okay. Awesome. See, I wanted us to get into a whole other level of discussion about some things, for really focusing on images, magic and
Okay.
images. But I think maybe we don't have that much time. One thing I'll just say is, not long ago, a friend of mine, who isn't into esoteric things, but is a really wonderful person, said to me that the word occult seemed, it put her off. It was like a scary word because it meant something evil. Like she had these associations with the word
I
occult
don't like the word
being
God.
right.
You know what I mean? I'm the same with God. I'm like, don't
Yeah.
tell me God. So
Right.
it's like, but that's fine. I mean, it's just one of those things. It's like, you don't like spinach either. I mean, this, it doesn't mean that spinach is instantly deadly, but you don't have to eat it. It's like,
Sure.
if you don't like the word occult, don't use it. But it's occult just means hidden.
Exactly.
I mean, originally, now it
Yes.
does. It's picked up this sort of like Christian thing, a cult as being like, whatever, blood sacrifice or whatever, killing virgins. But it's like, but that's
Sinister.
fine. Like I said, if you don't like that word, don't use it.
Sure.
But if that stops you from your inquiry, well, that's your thing. I mean, like I said, I can't, there's only so much. What I tend to do is I don't argue with people, right? When people are ready to learn, I'm ready to teach, right? But it's like there is, someone's like, well, this is how you can't prove this. I'm like, fine, you're not ready for me. You know what I mean? That's cool. Do your thing. You eat you keep eating that chocolate chip mint. It's like I'll stick with vanilla. You like the chocolate. I mean,
Yeah.
this is my biggest revelation
Okay.
recently, is that I go around every time I say something, I'm like, this is just my opinion. You may have a different opinion. I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong, but you do the same for me. Just let me do my thing. Because I'm like, really, there's a tendency for me to be like, yeah, I know everything. I'm the boss. But it's like, I'm very opinionated. But it's like, the reality of it is it's just my opinion, and it's like, you know, there's a lot of different ways to go about this. Now, what I would
Exactly.
say is there's not one right way. There's about 20 sort of right ways, and there's about an infinite number of wrong ways. I mean, so there's millions of ways to screw it up. But in terms of being sort of there's probably going to be about a bunch of approaches that are more or less. There's not one right approach though, and it's very easy to be like, this is the way you do it, and I'm like, keep coming back to like, okay, this is how I do it. If it resonates with you, great. If not, because that's what I say about this in general is like, I've said a lot of stuff, and it's like, it's not proof or not proof or argumentation, if you're like, that makes sense to me, then you can follow it up. If you're like, no, I reject that, I'm like, okay, that's cool too. I mean, it's just like you walked up to the cafeteria, I'm eating spinach, you're eating asparagus, asparagus is bad. I was like, you don't like asparagus. It's like, it's really not, ultimately, and everyone's on the path. Like I said, if you want to be atheist materialist, that's cool. I mean, say a lot of cutting things about that, but ultimately it's like, it's a perfectly valid approach. I mean, it's the majority approach nowadays anyway. So
Right.
that's what I would say, is that ultimately with this, what you're trying to do is what rings true for you long-term. That's been always my guide, is like my genius, my guardian angel or whatever, that I get enthused about stuff and it sticks with me. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I try and it doesn't stick, but it's like,
Sure.
I find that enthusiasm and I follow that. And that's in the end has been done really well for me, throughout my
Great.
life.
Great.
And that's what I would recommend to everybody,
I
is
was
to
just going to
say,
say that.
see what rings true to you, right? But recognize at the same time what's been put into you, right, in terms of like the conventional approach, and then what's really from your heart.
Exactly.
And that's
Conditioning.
the key, because it's
Mhm.
intuition versus emotion is hard, but
Right. Awesome. Yeah, man. I mean, there's so much that we can get into based
and we
upon
will.
when we will. All right.
We will.
Should we call it for now
Yeah,
or
we'll
what
call it
kind
for
of?
now.
Okay, because we can pick up next time with some of
Yeah,
this
that's what we'll do.
stuff. Yeah. Excellent.